When he woke up, he had a moment of bliss, where he didn't remember the events of the night before. Sure, he had a bit of a headache, and he could hear Eddie snoring on the couch downstairs, but that wasn't abnormal. They had nights where they drank sometimes, when Chris was under somebody else's care for a while. Then he remembered. He remembered coming home and checking through the mail, the only thing out of place being the thick white envelope. He remembered opening it and the subsequent mental breakdown that had followed, including trying to get Eddie to fight him, and then sobbing into his arms. Definitely not my finest moment. He cringed thinking about it now, but now he needed to deal with the consequence of last night. First, shower, which took him about 5 minutes, and he needed to start shaving down his shower time further, he noted. Second, evidence. He dug around in his closet until he found the own trunk that was padlocked shut, quickly opening it, glancing through the old files, photos, and other mementos he had been allowed to keep, since none of it was classified. He set the unlocked trunk down on the dining table. Third, breakfast. As in, hopefully Eddie could be persuaded into forgiving and forgetting last night if Buck woke him up with the smell of every single breakfast food he had the ingredients to make. Normally, he might have considered that he was overdoing it. However, after having called his friend at 2 a.m., trying to fight him, informing him of things that would shatter his entire perspective of Buck, sobbing into him, and then having to be put to bed by him, he was actually fairly certain that this was underdoing it. After about 20 minutes of Buck cooking and plating the eggs, sausage, bacon, toast, fried pizza, dough, hash browns, pancakes, and fruit, Eddie padded into the kitchen, rubbing his sleep out of his eyes. Dios me, Buck. Are you trying to feed every firefighter in LA? Eddie said as he stood in the kitchen, looking around at all the different dishes. Nope, just you, he said with a nervous smile, handing Eddie a plate so that he could serve himself from the veritable buffet he had made. Buck, Eddie said, imploring, ducking his head to try and meet Buck's eyes, which he was studiously avoiding. You know I can't possibly eat all of this, right? Just figured you might want options, Buck replied quickly, trying to keep up the false cheer. Speaking of options, what would you like to drink? I have water, milk, orange juice, grapefruit juice, or coffee. Water is fine, Eddie said offhandedly, and Buck quickly busied him up with the task. Buck, stop. What has gotten into you? Is this about last night? Buck stopped and turned around. He'd been caught. Unsurprisingly, considering it didn't take much to put two and two together about what was going through his head. Plus, it was Eddie, who could have figured it out, even if Buck had actually made it hard for him. I'm really sorry, Eddie. He was staring at his feet, rubbing the back of his neck. It was really shitty of me to call you like that and try to take it out on you, and then you had to deal with me afterwards, too. I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have called you or made you deal with any of that. Buck, look at me, Eddie said, voice leaving no room for argument. Buck wasn't in a position to deny him anything anyways right now. It was messed up to try and start a fight, but I forgive you, okay? I know what it's like. I know you didn't really mean to do it anyways. You're allowed to mess up or have a bad reaction every once in a while, as long as you learn from it and do better in the future. But Eddie, Buck protested, not willing to believe forgiveness could come that easily, or to believe he deserved it. You were supposed to be with Christopher this morning, and instead I made you stay here and deal with me and my mess. I shouldn't have dragged you into it. I should have just dealt with it. I'm sorry. Don't start with that BS. I'm starting to wonder if you'll ever get into your head, Buckley, Eddie said, sighing with frustration, moving his hand to grip at where Buck's neck met his shoulder and meeting his eyes with a fierce determination. You are my best friend, my partner, okay? I'm glad you called me. Christopher is important to me, but so are you, and I'm glad I could be here. I want to be here when things happen, and when you need a shoulder to lean on, all right? Not just when you need somebody to have your back in the field. It was silent for a minute after that. Every once in a while, Eddie would do this, put his hand on Buck's neck and eviscerate his mind and insecurities, leaving Buck not knowing how to properly react, but still scrambling to hold on to the figurative lifeline Eddie was offering. Thank you, Buck whispered, ducking his head and blushing, unsure of what else to do. Glad I could get it through your thick skull, Eddie said with a smirk and feigning knocking on Buck's head. Now grab yourself a plate and let's figure this all out. Figure this all out didn't end up entailing much, seeing as there wasn't much to be done. He was getting deployed whether he wanted to or not. No point fighting it, so that just left getting everything in order, which also didn't take much. He called his landlord, played his rent 2 months in advance. The deployment was only supposed to last a month, so he figured that would be enough. He paused his subscription to the various streaming apps he used and to the Science Weekly magazine he got. He called his lawyer and made sure everything was set with his will. He also called in some favors and got a shift, barring the one he had tomorrow, covered for the next week. So it wouldn't be too much of a hassle on Bobby. It was ridiculous how easy it was. It was a bit ridiculous how easy it was. It took less than an hour to have everything in order, so he could leave and maybe never return. He wasn't entirely sure what that said about him, but it couldn't be good. So, what's the plan for everybody? Eddie asked. I'm assuming you're going to tell them. I'm not entirely sure how you explain dropping off the face of the earth for at least a month otherwise. And yeah, Eddie was right. He wasn't done putting his life in order. His things were easy. The people, though, that would be harder. Yeah, I'm going to have to, aren't I? He replied, putting his head in his hands. This is going to suck. Eddie hummed in agreement and stood up. All right, come on. Where are we going? Buck asked, following him into the kitchen and started packing up the food. We're going to get Chris, Eddie said like it was obvious. Buck glanced at the clock to make sure that it wasn't that late. But he doesn't get out for another 3 hours. It's time he learned the valuable lesson of cutting class anyways. Eddie grinned at him, especially when it's for something important. Eddie, what are you talking about? Buck asked. He was definitely not following. In 3 days, you're leaving, and you're not coming back for a month, or at least the if ever was left unsaid, which means you and Chris should spend time together while you can. So today, you're going to hang out with me and Chris, have the best day possible. Then tomorrow, we're going into work early, have Maddie and Athena meet us there, and we'll tell everyone else then. It was a good plan as ever, except one thing. Are you sure about this? He asked, hesitant, putting the last container into the cooler. Why wouldn't I be? Eddie's brows were furrowed, and if Buck was a weaker man, he'd admit he looked adorable, face all scrunched up in confusion. Christopher, he answered. Are you sure I should be around him? Why the hell shouldn't you be? Eddie replied, clearly not following Buck's train of thought. I tried to fight you last night, Eddie, Buck explained, sighing. He could practically feel Eddie rolling his eyes from across the room. Are you going to hit my 9-year-old, Buck? Or hurt him in any way? Eddie asked with a sarcastic tone. His words were like a shock to his system anyways, and he straightened up, eyes flying open wide. No, of course not, he exclaimed, and Eddie chuckled a bit, almost sounded fond. Then, yeah, I'm sure about this, and that seemed to be all there was to it. They packed up the copious amount of leftovers from breakfast and Buck's trunk of evidence for later into Eddie's truck and took off towards Christopher's school. The kid was all smiles once he saw his dad and Buck waiting for him in the office, and he let out a little cheer as Eddie told him they were skipping school and just having a fun today. He hadn't eaten lunch yet when they pulled him out, so they stopped at a pizza place they all liked and sat down to eat. Christopher was only distracted for so long by his excitement before his uncanny perception kicked in, though. Why did you take me out of school? He asked. I know you said it was to have fun, but why? Eddie and Buck looked at each other. It was time to come clean. You remember how I was in the army for a while, right, buddy? Chris nodded. And you remember how I would be home for a while, and then they would need my help again, so I had to help them for a bit. Do you have to go again? Chris asked, visibly getting more and more upset. You promised that you were done helping. You said you were staying and helping people here instead. I'm not going anywhere, Chris. I'm retired. I promise, Eddie assured him quickly, placing a hand over his son's. I'm retired even from the military. Even if they ask, they can't make me anymore. Then what's going on? Chris said, clearly still confused and not yet willing to settle until he understood. Well, buddy, I got a letter the other day telling me it was my turn to go help people, Buck explained, and Christopher's head whipped around to face him. But you aren't in the army, Chris argued. They can't do that. Well, kiddo, I'm in something called the reserves, Buck explained. It means that I get to stay here most of the time, but sometimes when they really, really, really need some help, they get to call me, and then I have to go help. Buck felt like shit. This was awful. It never felt this bad before. But then again, he supposed he'd never had to explain to anyone why or where he was going. Why can't you just retire like Dad did? Chris suggested, not yet ready to accept that Buck was leaving. Well, that's not really how it works. When I signed up, they had me sign a contract that said I had to work for them for so many years before I was allowed to retire, Buck explained kindly. And my contract says I have another year before I can retire, so I have to go. Oh, why did you sign up? Chris explained. His lower lip was wobbling now, and Buck was grateful that they sat outside of the that the restaurant was practically empty. Don't you want to stay here? I do, buddy. Of course I do. I would do anything to make it so this wasn't happening. Buck reassures him, wanting nothing more than to scoop the boy up and never let him go. But he wasn't sure Chris would allow it. And he placed a comforting hand on his knee, but Buck was focused solely on Christopher. Then why did you sign up if you didn't want to leave? Chris was making an impressive effort to hold back his tears, but Eddie knew that the 9-year-old couldn't hold out much longer. I signed it a long time ago, way before I met you or was even a firefighter, he explained, hoping Chris would forgive him. I'm so sorry, Chris, but there's nothing I can do to change it. But I'll only be gone for a month. Then I'll come right back to you and give you the biggest hug in the world, and we can eat all the pizza and pancakes we can manage. Okay, buddy? Chris did burst out into tears then, and Buck couldn't stop himself from kneeling down in front of his seat. I'm so sorry, Chris, he said, hands reaching out to comfort but not touching. Not yet. He wouldn't comfort Chris if the boy didn't want it. Before you know it, I'll be back, and everything will be okay again. Chris threw himself off the chair and into Buck's arms then, and Buck thanked the universe that Chris wasn't pushing him away. They stayed like that for a while until Chris stopped crying and looked up at him blurry-eyed. You promise it's only a month? He asked. Buck couldn't exactly promise that. Deployments were extended sometimes, but he did the next best thing. That's what they told me. I can show you the papers and everything. And Chris just nodded at that, seeming to accept the answer. When are you leaving? Day after tomorrow, Buck answered solemnly, and Chris just hugged him tired. I'm going to miss you, Bucky, he said, and he felt his heart crack at the old nickname that Chris had seemingly outgrown a couple months ago. And that's why we pulled you out of school, Eddie said, seeing the perfect seagull, because we're going to miss our Buck, so we're going to have the best day ever together while we can. Think you're up for it? Chris looked at his dad and nodded. Okay, I can do that. Buck just rubbed his back. All right then, kiddo, what should we do? Chris seemed to think on that for a while before finally decided. Let's go to the zoo.